Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. We are social animals. We may not think we are social animals. Each of us may believe that we could exist just fine on our own little island, either physical or metaphorical, and have no need for other people. Many of us have done this for a certain amount of time, but that built-in social conditioning invariably rears its head after a while, and we find that we need the company of other human beings. As great and as complete we may think we are as individuals, at the end of the day, we crave the presence of others. This is nothing to be ashamed of. On the contrary, it is a biological need, probably programmed into us from our early history on this planet. Other people may be a major pain in the neck at times, even most of the time, but we still need them around. Whether it be to get our basic needs met or simply to be able to communicate and interact with others on a wavelength that suits our own, this addiction to human company seems to be pretty deeply ingrained. We are so intertwined with others that sometimes it is difficult to recognize ourselves as the individuals that we are. We are consciously and unconsciously influenced by countless other people so much that it is not all that obvious when our beliefs and opinions are our own or that of somebody else. We get caught up in the enthusiasm or emotional energy of those around us until it affects us and forces us to act either in sync or react in revulsion. Anybody who doubts this should try hanging out in a crowd at some event, like a concert, a ball game, or a political rally. Sooner or later, the feelings and the energy of everyone else enters into us like a contagious disease, and we find ourselves doing things that we wouldn't dream of had we been alone. Nowhere is this contagious power seen more than in a situation that requires a certain amount of willpower and stamina to sustain. If there are others around with whom we can share the momentum, who will carry us when we begin to falter in exchange for us carrying them when they need a boost, it is like an energy bar in the middle of a long run. We feed off each other's energy and even wordlessly provide and draw inspiration from one another. It is like a physical field of force, like magnetism or electricity, pushing and pulling in whatever direction the momentum moves. Of course, this is a two-way street. Just as we can reap positive energy off of others, we can also get negative energy. Boredom, as everyone knows, is highly contagious. So is anger, resentment, laziness, and hatred. These things are just as powerful and as infectious as their positive counterparts. As much as a feeling of love can permeate a group of people, so can hatred. Excitement is no more exciting than boredom is boring. When we are around a significant number who can influence us, we have a major trouble escaping the negative emotions flying in the air. It is like a collective hypnosis that catches us and forces us to do or feel what we would otherwise avoid like the plague. It has probably been this way for as long as people have been people. There is no reason to believe that in times we consider to be more primitive than our own, people are also not highly influenced by those around them. On the contrary, all evidence from literature of the past shows that this is indeed the case. Books as old as the Bible demonstrate that collective energy is every bit as powerful as anything an individual can muster. As much as the individual personality rises to the moment in Bible stories, the group dynamics are always right there to hold people back or spur them on. This week's Parsha is called Matot. That word means tribes. The word is pretty incidental to the contents of the Parsha, only serving as an introductory phrase in a series of commandments given to all the tribes concerning the making of vows. From there, the Parsha goes into a war of revenge that was to be taken against the nation of Midian for their part in the collective sexual and moral failures that hit the Israelites at the end of last week's Parsha. This is followed by a surprisingly long section dealing with dividing up the spoils of that war. The details are copious and even a little difficult to follow. Following this is a section that takes up the entire second half of the Parsha. In the grand scheme of things, it seems a little trivial of a matter to devote half of a Parsha to, but there it is nevertheless. The subject is the tribal portion that was chosen to two particular tribes, those of Reuven and Gad. The basic laws of divvying up the Holy Land had been given 2 parshas ago. Each tribe was to receive a portion in the land, which would then be further divided up along the lines of ancestral houses. In this original division, there were no portions given on the eastern side of the Jordan River. To fill in the geographical details, the original land of Israel was limited to what is now roughly the northern 2/3 of modern Israel, plus a certain portion of what is now Lebanon. It did not include anything east of the Jordan River, including the modern-day Golan Heights. However, the Israelites had journeyed north along the eastern side of the Jordan for several months of their 40-year-long journeys through the wilderness. Included in that final stretch were a series of battles against the nations that were living in the northern part of that area. These battles were all successful, and a relatively large region of land east of the Jordan River was conquered. This area corresponds to the modern-day Golan Heights and parts of northwestern Jordan. This was the land that is the subject of the second half of this week's Parsha. These two tribes realized that this was excellent grazing land, and they decided to settle there instead of receiving their portion in the original land of Israel. While on the surface this may have seemed like a reasonable request, being as the land was now conquered and ready for settlement. But instead of treating this as a welcome offer which would enable more land for each of the other tribes on the western side of the Jordan, Moshe treated it as an act of rebellion. Quote, "Why should your brothers go and fight while you stay here? Why are you trying to dissuade the Israelites from passing over into the land that God has given them?" He then goes further and compares them to the spies that had been sent out 40 years earlier to inspect the land and came back with the negative report, which discouraged the entire assembly from wanting to go through with the whole thing. This was the act of defiance which sealed the fate of that entire generation, forcing the adults to spend the rest of their lives in the wilderness and never reaching the final goal. The youth of that generation were exempt from that decree, and they were now the adults who stood on the cusp of entering the Holy Land. Moshe's final rebuke of these tribes was, quote, "And now you arise in the place of your fathers as a band of sinners to add to God's wrath against Israel. You will dissuade them from following after God, and God will once again leave us in the wilderness, and you will have destroyed this nation completely." These are pretty harsh words for a group who simply wanted to take their inheritance portion in a land that was already conquered instead of the land that still needed to be conquered. How could he compare them to the generation of the spies who rejected that inheritance altogether? Were they really trying to dissuade everyone else from crossing the Jordan and finishing the job? Wasn't it going too far to accuse them of, quote, destroying this nation completely? It is a little unclear exactly what compelled Moshe to make this comparison. In the end, however, a compromise was reached. These two tribes and a half of another tribe would receive their portions in the land east of the Jordan. But the men could not settle there until they had shared equally in the burden of the upcoming battles on the western side of the Jordan. Only then, when all the other tribes were secure in their inheritance, could they return to their land, their wives, and their children on the eastern side. But what about that strange rebuke? Was Moshe just trying to drive a point home by making this outlandish comparison with the spies? From the text, it seems like he meant every word that he said. This act of claiming inheritance before all the real battles had been fought was indeed an act of rebellion. Whatever their real intentions in making this request, there was no getting around the fact that when some tribes dropped out of the main project, it would inevitably have a negative influence on the others. How could anybody not consider the possibility that they should do exactly the same thing? If these guys could take the easy way out, why can't I? While this may not have been the same as out-and-out rejection of the land and totally giving up on the entire mission, it was tantamount to the same thing. Either way, the effect would be to turn everyone else off from the ultimate goal. It was impossible to simply withdraw from the great task of conquering the Holy Land, regardless of the reason, without spreading a cloud of disillusion over the minds of those who wanted to go forward. This is the way things are. What we do and what we say has an unavoidable effect on those around us. We are them and they are us. When we are in this together, if anybody gives up, it affects us all. We might like to believe that it doesn't have to be this way. We might claim that we can overcome all that negativity and just push on our own. Perhaps some of us have experienced this very power, the power of the individual over that of the group. While this does happen, and when it does happen, it is indeed remarkable, it is not the norm. Human nature dictates that what others do, especially those with whom we are intertwined for one reason or another, will have a powerful influence on us. This human force field works both upon us and upon others. We have all felt the power of those around us and been moved by its influence. But we should also be aware of the reversed influence that we have on them. When we act or speak, we do not do so on our own little island, as much as we may want to believe that. Our words and our deeds reach out beyond our own lives and infect and influence the lives of others. We are all powerful influencers in our own way, even if we are unaware of it. Only we can determine if that influence will be negative or positive. Shabbat Shalom.